Amidst debt talks, Republicans are rallying their members to a unified message against raising taxes, the subject of a key speech by House Majority Leader John Boehner earlier this week. Addressing a crowd of Wall Street elites, including conservative billionaire David Koch at the New York Economic Club, Boehner called for trillions of dollars in spending cuts and demanded no tax hikes, even on the wealthiest.
And we will never have real economic growth if we're going to raise taxes on those in America who create jobs. So if we're serious about balancing the budget and getting our economy back to creating jobs, tax hikes should be off the table.
I'm joined now by Republican Congressman Joe Walsh of Illinois, with me from the Capitol. Good afternoon, sir.
How are you, Martin?
Great to have you with us again on the show. John Boehner the other night, in a room full of billionaires, categorically refused to raise taxes. But I imagine that many of your constituents will not be so happy when their children are in larger classes with fewer teachers and when local services begin to suffer more and more cutbacks. So how does what he said in New York relate to your constituents in Illinois?
You know what, Martin, my constituents in Illinois, whether they're billionaires, millionaires, or just everyday folk, understand that we've got to grow this economy, and you do not grow the economy by raising taxes on anyone. This is a spending problem, and I got to tell you, Martin, we have an unbelievable opportunity here to use this debt ceiling issue as a real opportunity to get once-in-a-generation spending reform.
You talk about not laying up debt for our children, but under President Clinton, as I understand it, taxes were raised and the economy grew by an average of 4%. So wouldn't it be a much more responsible way to approach the deficit by balancing some tax cuts with balancing cuts with some tax rises?
Again, Martin, what history tells me, and I think what history tells most people, is when you cut taxes on people, billionaires, millionaires, and all of us, the economy grows, jobs are created, new businesses start.
Mr. Walsh, I'm sorry to interrupt you for a moment, but
sure.
I was just referring to history. That was during President Clinton's
Well, then,
presidency.
Martin, then refer to what John F. Kennedy did in the 60s. Refer to what Ronald Reagan did in the 80s. Taxes were cut, and government revenues, Martin, soared. And we've always had issues when it comes to a debt or a deficit when it comes to spending. President Clinton was fortunate in that a Republican Congress took over the House in '94, and they put real clamps on spending. We have an enormous opportunity this year to cut spending and to enact real spending reform.
Just how unified is the GOP on this? Because you've got Majority Leader Eric Cantor and Budget Chairman Paul Ryan saying Medicare reform is off the table, while John Boehner and other leaders have backtracked a little on that message. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Martin. I think there's been confusion. Look, we Republicans have been out for 2 or 3 weeks saying now, as part of our budget, we've got a reform in there to save Medicare. And we have to do something to save Medicare and save Medicaid and Social Security. Those are important issues, and they need to be dealt with head on. When it comes to this debt ceiling, though, on this issue, we've got an opportunity to cut spending and structurally reform how we spend. I've introduced a balanced budget amendment in the House, one that every Senate Republican has signed on to. This would be real, lasting spending reform. I think both issues need to be treated seriously but separately.
And so briefly and finally, Mr. Walsh, are you saying absolutely no tax rises whatsoever in the same melodic tune that was offered by John Boehner earlier this week?
Well, I'm not very melodic, Martin, but I will tell you...
I don't know, you're not bad.
No tax increases on anyone, small businesses or any of us. We have to grow this economy.
Congressman Joe Walsh, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Martin.